How's it going, everyone? I finally finished the game, so it's time for the review. Well, I call this a review, but honestly, this is more like my biased opinion, so don't take this too seriously. And without any further ado, let's get right into it. Obviously, the most important thing in any Robot Wars is the animation, so let's start with that. Overall, I would say they made some good improvements compared to the last few games, and the one thing that really stood out is the pilot cut-ins. I'm just glad they are no longer using those low-res images ripped from the original show, or at least that's what they look like to me. And I'm sure some people, they will say, yeah, they like those cut-ins because they're a reference to the show. But if you look at Raya, for example, I feel like those cut-ins, it's proof that they have the ability to pay homage to the source material and still make them look good. So I guess my issue with the cut-ins in the previous games isn't so much about the quality, because there are good ones, but rather the inconsistencies. Another thing I really like about these new and improved cut-ins is how they are showing the cockpit, and the fact they are including a lot of small details like the screens on the monitors matching the background. As for the actual animation themselves, the best thing I can say is they are more consistent now, as in the floor has been raised, but the ceiling has been relatively the same, if not slightly lowered. If I have to pick my top 5 attacks from this game and compare them to my top 5 in VX and T, I might actually lean towards VX and T. And two of my biggest reasons for this is the choppiness and the lack of clarity. What do I mean by that? Well, let's talk about it. I'm sure most of you out there know what I mean by choppiness, but just in case, here is an example. There are moments in this game where Mazin Kaiser's movement is stuttering or it seems like frames of animation is missing. By no means am I an expert, but I'm pretty sure one of the fundamentals of animation is to make things look as smooth as possible. Unless you want to tell me this is also a reference to the source material, which I kinda doubt it. So this problem has actually been plaguing the mainline Robot Wars for quite a few years now with no signs of improvement. So this is extra frustrating because we know they're capable of much better animation. And before anyone points this out in the comment, yes, I am aware they have different teams working on different units. But at the end of the day, it still has to be approved by someone. And whoever is in charge looked at this and said to themselves, yes, this looks fine, let's put it in the game. That said, I do have to admit I still like a lot of these animations. The choreograph for some of these attacks look really neat, and I would say this is where they improved the most. As for clarity, or lack thereof, let's look at this first. The first 2 hit looks fine. It's the last one that bothers me. I feel like they didn't emphasize the hit enough. To use a more technical term, it doesn't have a good keyframe for the hit. And this is actually pretty common for attacks animated by the aerials person. So the movement in these animations are usually really fluid, but for some reason the actual hit tends to get glossed over. Some of you might argue this is more realistic, but that's not what I want here. To use a wrestling term, I want them to sell the hit, or make the hit feel powerful. And if that's at the expense of realism, then so be it. This might be cheating a bit since this is an attack from a different game, but here is an example with a good keyframe and impact. It's a little hard to notice, but they extended a hit a little bit, or you can say they froze time for a split second there. And this split second gives our eyes enough time to see what is getting hit and how it got hit. And this, to me at least, makes all the difference. Okay, some of you might be thinking, why am I being so harsh on the animation? It looks fine for the most part, and I agree. What makes me a little angry, well, that might be an exaggeration, but what bothers me is that I know for a fact they can do better than this. So let's compare 2 similar attacks from this game and OG.
とにかく前に出る。できることを精一杯やるだけだ。リュッケバインサーティアス。こいつで終わらせる。くらえ。ブラックホールキャノン。やれるな。 エグゼクスバインシーケンス BBC エボリューターいけサターンフォーメーション来いブラックホールバスターキャノン強調の眷属その真の力を見せてやる超重獄に落ちろ
I don't know about you guys, but I definitely prefer the latter. And that attack was made 9 years ago for the PS3. So what makes this worse is the Hukubine 30 is supposed to be the main character for a game celebrating the franchise's 30th anniversary. I know there might be some factors like the OG graphics engine might not be compatible with licensed units, or the cost of making these animations too high, and so on, so on, so on. But as a consumer, we shouldn't be expected to know all these. At the end of the day, all it really matters is whether this is a good product or not, and if they have made improvements from previous work. Well, that's enough about the animation. Let's talk about the new mechanics introduced in this game. So the biggest one is the tactical area select. Personally, I really like this new mechanic. I really enjoyed the freedom we have to choose the order of missions and what units we want to recruit first. Not to mention the crazy amount of dialogues and stages they have made to accommodate this. I have to give them a lot of props for actually pulling this off. And if there's any downside to this, it might be the lack of flow to the story. But let's be real here, the older games didn't exactly have a really good flow to it. They're mostly episodic. And if they really want to keep the flow going without interrupting certain plots, they can always use emergency missions, which they did in this game. And I don't know if they'll keep using this mechanic due to the sheer amount of work and effort involved, but I really hope they'll bring this back again in the future. Next up, we have the relic missions. Technically, this is part of tactical area select, but I think it deserves its own section just because of how much I dislike them. The missions themselves are fine. What bothers me is how we access them. I just can't understand why we have to access these from the map instead of the mission list. If they think navigating through this map is fun or it serves to give us more info or lore, then sure. But let's face it, it doesn't do any of that. So if they plan on bringing this back, please let us choose from the mission list, or put more effort into designing the map and make the whole process fun or informative. And finally, let's talk about the story. For the most part, I would say they did a decent job adapting the story of all these different series. Well, decent for RoboWar standards. And of course, there are some series that got favorable treatment and some got shafted, but overall, I have to say I enjoyed it. The thing I like the most about the story is the relationship or the backstory of the original three. For those who don't know, I'm referring to Amuro, Koji, and Ryoma. So this makes me wish we got a game, or maybe even a DLC, where we get to play through some of these scenarios they often talk about. The OG story, on the other hand, is quite the disappointment. It actually seems pretty promising in the beginning with the development of Mitsuba and the mystery behind the main character, as in Edge or Azu, whichever one you chose. But as soon as they introduced the real villain, the plot just became really bland and generic. And to me, the biggest problem is actually how non-threatening they seem. So for an organization who supposedly took down these divine civilization and the protector of the universe, so to speak, they seem pretty lacking in military strength. I just find it hard to believe that they accomplished everything they said using those 3 or 4 types of mechs. And that doesn't help that they actually don't look that impressive. So this is it for my so-called review. I know it sounds like I didn't like the game that much, but I did had a good time playing through this. It's just that I was expecting more, especially from a game that's supposed to celebrate the 30th anniversary of this franchise. But anyways, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.